My name is Dr. Keith Black. I have been a neurosurgeon for over 30 years, most of them within the unblinking walls of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center here in Los Angeles. In that time, I have seen the human mind in every state imaginable, from the fragile tremor of new life to the final flicker before death. But the case I'm about to tell you about, it is unlike anything I have ever faced. It is about a man named Daniel Rivas, a patient who entered my operating room one night under circumstances so violent, so inexplicably, that his memory has never left me. It was just after midnight when Daniel Rivas was rolled into trauma. Room 3, the fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, casting the room in an uneven haze, too bright in some places, shadowed in others. The air smelled of antiseptic and copper, sharp enough to make the back of my throat tighten. My gloves were already slick with blood before I realized something was wrong. Not wrong in the usual sense, in the operating room. Wrong is the default. You are always fighting the wrong pressure in the arteries, wrong rhythm in the heart, wrong timing in the brain's desperate firing. But this was different. The patient was in his 30s, tall, lean, skin pale against the deep crimson, soaking his shirt. The EMT's report was brief. Victim of an assault in a downtown parking garage. Multiple stab wounds to the abdomen. No witnesses willing to speak. They had applied pressure, given fluids, but his blood pressure was dropping fast. My team moved like a single organism. Gowns swishing, clamps clicking into place, monitors beeping their urgent code. But my attention caught on something else. The floor, there, beneath the surgical table, spreading across the sterile tiles in an arc, was a spray pattern that stopped me cold. The droplets were too far from the wound site. They radiated outward, not downward. Each was spaced irregularly, as though flung from a moving source. The shape was wrong, less like a spill, more like an impact. I have seen thousands of trauma cases, thousands of pools, sprays, and smears of blood. This one didn't match any of them. Pressure, I said automatically, my hands still working. Suction drawing back the tide inside his abdomen. But I kept looking, my mind pulling diagrams from memory. Forensic studies, textbooks, even photographs from crime scenes I had been shown during joint hospital police briefings. A nurse glanced down at the floor, then back at me. "Looks like it came from somewhere else," she muttered. Her voice carried the smallest tremor. Daniel's pulse was thready, flickering on the monitor. Outside, I could hear faint sirens, another ambulance arriving. But in here, the world narrowed to the slow, heavy thump of my own heartbeat and the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. I worked deeper, clamping, suturing, searching for the source of the bleed. But the internal injuries didn't match the volume of blood on the floor. Even if every drop inside him had poured out, it would not have created that pattern. Heart rates dropping, the anesthesiologist warned. We pushed epinephrine. His body jolted slightly on the table. My hands moved faster, but my thoughts were split, half in the surgical field, half on that impossible red constellation below us. I told myself to focus. There would be time later to think, to analyze, to explain. But a deeper part of me knew this was not just a medical anomaly. Something else had happened before or during the moment he arrived here. The beeps from the monitors slowed. One long, continuous tone filled the room. We attempted resuscitation, the chest compressions heavy and rhythmic. Nothing. After 30 minutes, I called it. Time of death, 12:47 a.m. I stepped back from the table. My gloves were heavy with clot and saline. Someone handed me a towel, but I barely registered it. I kept looking at the floor, at that frozen spray of red, like a message written in a language I could not yet read. In that moment, I thought it would be just another tragic case, filed away in the back of my mind with hundreds of others. I didn't yet know that the image of that pattern would stalk me in my sleep, pull me awake in the dead hours, and lead me to cross lines I had sworn never to approach. The operating room emptied slowly, like a theater after a play no one enjoyed, but everyone had to watch. One by one, the nurses peeled off their gloves, the plastic snapping faintly in the silence. Someone switched off the overhead lamps, and the room dimmed to a softer, almost guilty light. I stripped off my gown and stepped into the corridor. It was quieter than usual for this time of night, the air thick with that post-emergency stillness. Only the faint buzz of the vending machines filled the space. Between breaths, 2 men were waiting for me near the nurses' station. Detectives. The kind who don't need to show a badge. Their posture says everything. One was tall and narrow, hair neatly parted, the other shorter, broader, his eyes scanning the hallway like he expected someone to run. They spoke in low voices with the head nurse, who clutched the patient's chart like it was a shield. When I approached, they shifted their focus to me, Dr. Black, the taller one said. We'll need your surgical notes, any photographs, and the linens used during the procedure. His tone was polite, but in that clipped way that leaves no room for refusal. I nodded, too tired to challenge them. Cause of death was internal hemorrhage from multiple abdominal wounds. We did everything possible, the shorter detective interrupted. We're aware, but what we're interested in is the floor. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The floor, he glanced at his partner, then back to me. The blood pattern, it's not typical. We'd like the cleaning staff to leave it untouched until our crime scene unit gets here. I didn't respond immediately. It was strange enough that I had noticed the pattern, stranger still that they had 2, and were giving it precedence over the body itself. Behind them, 2 nurses whispered. One was saying that Daniel had spoken in the ambulance. Just a few words before he lost consciousness. I stepped closer. What did he say? They looked at each other. The first nurse said, "It sounded like, don't let them find it." The second shook her head. "No, I swear it was. Don't let them inside." 2 phrases, same cadence, one hinting at a secret object, the other at an intrusion. Both unsettling. The detectives made no comment, simply jotting something in their notebooks. I tried to read the lines on their faces, but their expressions were blank. The kind of controlled neutrality you only learn after years of interrogating grief-stricken strangers, as they bagged evidence swabs, gauze pads, a fragment of Daniel's shredded shirt. I found my thoughts circling back to that impossible spray of red beneath the table. The wound sites in his abdomen would have produced pooling, seepage, maybe short arcs if a vessel had burst under pressure, but not that sharp, directional scatter. When they were finished, the detectives thanked me in that detached, procedural way. The tall one added, "If you think of anything unusual, call us. Anything." His gaze lingered on me for half a second longer than necessary. They left without touching the body. I remained in the hallway for several minutes, the chill of the hospital air settling into my skin. I told myself it was just exhaustion making me overthink, that I should write up my notes and go home. But deep down, I knew this wasn't finished. The detectives knew something I didn't, and for reasons I couldn't yet name. That bothered me more than the fact that Daniel Rivas had just died on my table. In the days that followed Daniel Rivas's death, I told myself I had done what every surgeon must: move on. You cannot carry every loss. You cannot replay every failure. In medicine, detachment is not coldness, it's survival. So I filled my schedule. I performed spinal, tumor resections, aneurysm clippings, emergency trauma repairs. I smiled at families in waiting rooms, reassured patients before anesthesia took them under. But when night came, the silence of my apartment filled with the memory of that floor, the impossible red spray beneath the table. It wasn't grief alone. It was something sharper, heavier, a question that refused to stay unanswered. On the third night, I returned to the hospital after hours. The corridors were dim, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. In my office, I unlocked my computer and pulled up the surgical footage from Daniel's case. The images were harsh, the camera cold, unblinking, I recording every incision, every flash of steel. I paused at moments where the floor was visible, studying the pattern. Angle, distance, density. Each detail contradicted what I knew should be there. A downward wound produces gravity's signature. This was something else entirely. The arc was angled upward, the droplets larger than expected for a wound in the abdomen. And there was something else. No secondary drops. No scattered trace where gravity would have pulled stray flecks down. It was as if the spray had been talented, pulled up the crime scene photographs the police had shared. In every one, the pattern was the same, frozen mid-motion, like a snapshot of an event that never actually happened in that room. I started keeping notes. Not medical notes, investigative ones, dates, times, diagrams. I drew the pattern from memory, over and over, searching for meaning in the angles. The more I wrote, the more I felt the subtle shift. I was no longer thinking as a physician. I was thinking as someone chasing a hidden truth in a moment of weakness. I called an old acquaintance, a forensic pathologist I had met years ago during a joint case review. He owed me a favor. I sent him a cropped photograph of the floor, leaving out any identifiers. When he finally called back, there was a pause before he spoke. "That blood wasn't from your patient," he said. My breath caught. "What do you mean? It's not accidental. Not from an injury you'd treat in surgery. That spray was deliberate. Someone bled there on purpose, or wanted it to look that way." His voice was calm, but under it, I could hear something else: caution. The kind of tone you use when you've stepped it close to something you don't want to own. He didn't ask me where the photograph came from, and I didn't tell him. 1 week later, I was searching the hospital's imaging database for a different patient entirely when I saw it, a file tagged with Daniel Rivas's name, dated just hours before the night he came in, dying on my table. It shouldn't have been there. There was no record in his official chart of him being at Cedars-Sinai earlier that day. No triage, note, no admission form. But the file was locked with administrative clearance, the kind used for sensitive cases. I hesitated, then used my credentials to bypass the restriction. What I found was a CT scan, grainy and uneven, taken of his chest cavity. It was timed at 3:14 p.m., nearly 9 hours before he was attacked. At first glance, nothing stood out. But then my eyes caught it. A faint, irregular shadow along the upper left thoracic region. Small, metallic, and angular, tucked between the ribs like it was hiding. I scanned the report. No note of removal. No indication that anyone had even acknowledged its presence. The radiology notes were unusually sparse. A single line, no acute. Findings relevant to patients presenting complaint. That was it. A cold weight settled in my stomach. This wasn't an oversight. Someone had chosen not to document that object. I went down to radiology. The tech on duty was a woman I'd worked with for years. She was kind, competent, the kind of person who notices if you've skipped lunch. When I asked about the scan, her face drained of color. "I was told to clear that record," she said quietly. "Told it was a mistake and that I shouldn't keep a copy." "By who?" I asked. She shook her head. "Keith, don't get involved. Just leave it." Her eyes darted to the hallway, like someone might be listening. That night, I dreamt of the operating table. The lamps above burned white-hot, flooding the room in light. On the floor beneath me, the blood pattern glowed like a constellation. I knelt, tracing its arcs with my fingers, and realized it was leading somewhere. Each droplet an arrow, pointing toward a shadowed corner of the room. But when I turned to look, I woke up. My hands were clenched into fists, and I could still feel the tacky warmth of blood on my palms. It began as a flicker in my peripheral vision, the sense of someone occupying the same space too often to be coincidence. 3 nights in a row, after my shifts ended, I saw her in the ER waiting room, always in the same chair, near the far wall. Always still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed, not on a phone or book, but on the main entrance. She never approached. The desk never signed in. It was as if she were waiting for something that might never come. The 4th night, I paused before leaving. The fluorescent lights gave her skin a pale, almost translucent quality. Her dark hair framed her face in loose strands, and there was a tension to her posture, the kind that comes from holding yourself together too long. And then it struck me. I had seen her before. The night Daniel Rivas was brought in, she'd been there, in the far corner of the same room, head bowed as we rushed past with the gurney. I remembered thinking she might have been asleep, but now I wasn't sure she'd ever closed her eyes. I crossed the room slowly. She didn't look. Up until I was close enough to see the faint tremor in her hands. "You were here the night we lost him," I said. Her eyes flickered. "I don't know who you mean." "Daniel Rivas, the man from the garage, the one whose blood..." I stopped myself, but it was too late. The moment I said it, the blood, something shifted in her expression. A flash of recognition, quickly. Hidden, she stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "Some truths aren't yours to open," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost tender. I took a step forward. "What do you mean?" But she was already walking toward the doors. They slid open with a hiss, swallowing her into the night. Later, in my office, I requested security footage from the night of the incident. I watched the grainy video on my monitor. She arrived 20 minutes before the ambulance, sat in that same chair, never spoke to anyone. After the surgery failed, she left. The timestamp on her exit was 6 minutes before I walked out to tell Daniel's sister he was gone. There's a point in every obsession where you stop noticing the boundaries you're crossing. You tell yourself it's still professional curiosity, still part of your duty, until you realize you've left the hospital not because you're off shift, but because you're chasing ghosts. It was just past midnight when I found myself in the parking garage where Daniel had been attacked. The place was nearly empty. Sodium lights cast long shadows between the concrete pillars. Somewhere far above, a car door slammed. I'd expected to see remnants of the violence, dark stains on the cement, some trace of the blood that had flooded my ore floor. But there was almost nothing, just a faint discoloration near a drain. Already fading, the disparity struck me. In the operating room, the spray had been violent, impossible to ignore. Here, it was as if someone had wiped the slate clean. I walked the space, counting steps, imagining the angles. I sketched in a small notebook where the ambulance might have parked, where an assailant could have stood. The woman's words kept returning to me. Some truths aren't yours to open. The CT scan shadow, the missing object, the hidden file. Each fragment felt like part of a structure I couldn't yet see, a building in the fog. A voice startled me. "Lost, Doc." A security guard in a faded jacket approached, flashlight bobbing. He seemed more amused than suspicious. I was curious, I said carefully, about the shooting. I didn't correct him. The records never mentioned a shooting. "Yeah," he continued, leaning against a pillar. "Messy business. You." "No, there were two of them, right?" My chest tightened. "Two victims." He nodded. "Guy you treated, and another one. They loaded him into a private ambulance before the cops even showed. Some VIP thing, I guess. Never heard what happened to him. A second victim, the missing blood, the metallic shadow in Daniel's chest. My mind began to assemble them into something far more dangerous than I'd imagined that night. Back in my apartment, I found an envelope pushed halfway under my door. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. It was the floor of my operating room. The blood pattern, circled in red ink. Beneath it, in block letters. Stop. The photograph in the envelope had been gnawing at me for days. That circle of red ink wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. Whoever sent it knew I couldn't let it go. I began comparing it to the forensic reference materials I could discreetly access. My late nights at the hospital became less about patients and more about scrolling through case studies, scanning diagrams of blood distribution. It wasn't the sort of thing surgeons usually study. We deal with the source of bleeding, not its choreography after it leaves the body. But the truth emerged like an image, developing in a dark room. The pattern wasn't consistent with an injury on the operating table. It didn't match the splatter from a patient lying prone. The droplets curved upward, tiny arcs frozen mid-flight, like the ghost of a fountain. That only happened with arterial spray from someone standing. Someone else had been bleeding. In my operating room, the idea was impossible. Or, a protocol is airtight. If a staff member gets injured, it's documented, treated, reported. I combed through incident logs from that night. Nothing, not a paper cut, not a needle prick, except one nurse's name was now listed as on extended leave. Her name was Lara Chen. I remembered her steady hands, sharp eyes, quick to anticipate needs before I voiced them. I found her in a small rental house on the east side of the city. She opened the door just enough to see who it was, then tried to close it again. "I just need a moment," I said. Her jaw worked as if she were deciding whether to slam it shut. Then she stepped aside. The place was dim, curtains drawn though. It was midday. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt toast. When I asked about that night, she froze. "I can't talk about it," she said. "Something happened to you," I pressed. In the OR, her eyes flicked toward her side, just below the ribs. Then, reluctantly, I felt something sharp graze me. Thought it was just a piece of equipment, shifting. But when I got to the locker room, she trailed off, gripping her shirt. My scrubs were gone from the laundry bin, replaced with a fresh set. No one said a word. Gone. She nodded, like they never existed. The silence between us thickened. I could hear my own pulse in my ears before I could ask more. There was a knock at the door, firm, deliberate. Her face drained of color. "You need to go," she whispered, ushering me toward the back door. Now I stepped into the alley behind her building, heart pounding. By the time I reached the street, I was already certain the blood I'd seen that night hadn't all belonged to Daniel Rivas, and someone was making sure I never found out whose it was. The walls of Cedars-Sinai had always felt like sanctuary to me. Now they felt like a noose tightening. That morning, the administrator called me in. No small talk, just the steady, even tone of a man delivering bad news he's decided is final. "You're to let the police handle this. Dr. Black, effective. Immediately, one more step outside your role, and you'll lose your privileges here. Permanently." I didn't argue. I'd learned that in certain kinds of warfare, silence is the only weapon you have left. It was my last scheduled shift before they would put me on forced leave. I told myself I'd focus only on the work. But when I stepped into the ER, she was there again, the woman from the waiting room. This time, she didn't avoid me. She stood, walked over, and placed something into my hand. A sealed surgical pouch, the kind we use for instruments. Inside was a small metallic shard, jagged at the edges, stained a deep brown that I knew instantly wasn't rust. Along its surface were tiny engraved markings, numbers, but not in any sequence I recognized. They looked like coordinates. Before I could speak, the overhead speakers crackled. "Dr. Black 20R4, stat dot." The woman's eyes locked on mine. "It's happening again," she said. I ran. OR4 was a storm. Nurses moving with controlled panic. Machines screaming alarms. On the table lay a new patient, unconscious. His chest wound nearly identical to Daniel Rivas's. And then I saw it. The blood was already pooling in strange, upward curves, defying the logic I'd been taught since medical school. The pattern was back.